Sikilize mbashara.
Yes, Andrew Tanui is my name. Na karibu.
Good morning, Mr. Kakai.
Good morning.
My name is Caroline Kituku, a member of the panel.
Good morning, Kakai. How are you?
Fine, thank you, sir.
My name is Nicodemus Boy, a member of the panel.
Thank you.
Sir.
Good morning. My name is Fatuma Ali Saman, a member of the panel.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Kakai, and it's really nice to see you. Welcome to this dialogue. My name, as you know, is Koki Muli Grinyo. Karibu sana. I'm a member of the.
Good morning, Francis Kakai Kissinger. My name is Evans Misati. I'm a member of this selection panel. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Thank you, members and our friend Francis Kakai. You have a historical name, Kissinger. So we would like to know you. How come you are Kissinger? And just to get to hear a bit about your life and career, and highlight if there are any awards that you have received in the course of your journey, and finally mention why you think you're the man for Chebukati's position.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, members of the panel. My name is Francis Kissinger Kakai, and I must take this opportunity to thank all of you for having me here and for giving me a chance to appear before you, and I don't take this for granted. As I said, my name is Francis Kakai Kissinger. I'm a lawyer by profession. I hold a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Nairobi. I hold a postgraduate diploma in international trade law from the University of Turin in Italy. And finally, I hold a master's degree specializing in human rights, governance, and aspects of elections. In terms of award, I was awarded a scholarship by the International Labour Organization to go and study the postgraduate diploma in trade law from the University of Turin. Later on, sometimes in 2006, I was awarded another scholarship again to go and study human rights, governance, and aspects of elections at a master's level in the United States of America. In terms of my experience, Chair, and what makes me think I'm qualified for this position, allow me to only focus on the aspects of my CV that is relevant to the position that I've applied for. But I must also mention that I've had an advantage or a privilege of being a lecturer, and I taught at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and I also taught at the Kenya School of Law. So let me focus now, Chair, on the relevant experience. I first got exposed to election in 1997 as a very young student then. I was just about to complete my university. And the late chairman of the ECK, the defunct ECK, the late Honorable Justice Zacchaeus Chesoni, gave me an opportunity to work in the 1997 general election. At that time, the ECK, the defunct now, was dealing with the issues of civic and voter education. But if you fast forward now, civic education is no longer a domain of the current IEBC. So Zacchaeus Chesoni then, may his soul rest in peace, thought I will be in charge of training of trainers, in the sense that I'll train so many clerical officers who will then be deployed outside to go and man the general election. After completing that task on election in 1997, so I was actively involved in 1997, after 6 months, the late Chesoni gave me another contract again to be in charge of our warehouse and supervising people in that warehouse, where now the election materials, the ballot boxes and ballot papers, you remember those days we were using the black ones, were now being brought back to the headquarters for storage and for purposes of preparation of election petition. Those are what we call sensitive electoral materials. That was the end of my assignment with the Electoral Commission of Kenya. And sometimes in 2007, in 2006, I left Kenya to go and undergo my master's degree in the US. Came back in 2007. That was an election year as well. On 1st of December in 2007, I was recruited fresh from the US. I was recruited by ELOG. ELOG gave me an opportunity to be the chief executive officer. And at this point, I must disclose that Dr. Koki Muli, at the time, was a centerpiece behind ELOG when she was working with IED. So they gave me a job as a CEO, and ELOG was then coordinating elections, observation and monitoring within Kenya. And it didn't materialize because hot on the heels, UNDP was also seeking for election observation and experts in election to assist in civic and voter training. So my good friend, Dr. Karuti Kanyinga, had acquired a very huge consultancy with the UNDP. And Karuti Kanyinga reached out to me and said I should join the team to go around the country carrying out civic and voter education. So I joined the team, and I was allocated two provinces. At the time we used to call them provinces. I was allocated 2 provinces, the Rift Valley and Western. My responsibility was to go through and engage with all stakeholders, known and unknown, in election matters. So the churches, the civil society, the CBOs, politicians, candidates, and so forth, to train them on civic and voter education. That engagement was very successful, and we went into election. After my engagement with the UNDP, I then joined and was recruited by the German Technical Corporation. German Technical Corporation is a German government-based organization that supports governments and civil society in this country. So I was hired as a senior governance advisor, and I worked there supporting, that time, 2 main institutions as a governance advisor. I was supporting the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters surrounding combating corruption, and I was supporting the Ministry of Justice. We had a program at the time called GJLOS. So I was at the center of it. After my tenure as a senior governance advisor from GIZ, I joined government, and at that time, the institutions, the new constitution was in place, and many institutions were looking for means and ways of enhancing the operation of those institutions. So I joined the judiciary. I joined the judiciary as a deputy chief registrar of that institution. That was around 2011. And at the same time, while at the judiciary, the management of the judiciary then thought it's wise to appoint me as a director of a new program that I was tasked to begin. And that program was called the Judiciary Performance Project. So, my responsibility then in the judiciary was to focus more on the day-to-day operation and management of the institution, because as a deputy chief registrar, you're also basically in the administration. And I was tasked with fundraising for funds from the World Bank, and I designed at that time, with the help of other colleagues there, the JP project, and we were able to raise 120 million US dollars. Those were the monies that eventually found themselves in the judiciary under that project with the World Bank, and it was meant for expansion of courts. It was meant for having IT infrastructure in the courts. It was meant for buying equipments in the courts to ensure that we have at least 47 high courts, at least a high court in each county. After my tenure at the judiciary, I went back to a setting mode. And I remembered that I loved election. And my mind took me back to election. And the then chairman of the African Union, Her Excellency Dr. Dlamini Zuma, was having a program of election observation and recruited me as a coordinator of elections with a specific allocation of countries within Africa. Because in a year you will have one election or two elections running in a country, and my work was basically to go around those countries to monitor and observe elections in those countries. I took the job seriously, and that job changed my perspective on election, because I was able, as I speak now, to do about 8 countries in Africa. 8 countries in Africa on elections. Every year I'll do an election. Some countries I'll go there twice. And my responsibility when you are in that institution or when you are in that position as a coordinator of election, you are working with the EMB of that country. You are auditing the entire electoral process in that country. At your fingertips, you have what we call the electoral cycle, and you are auditing to know whether that country has complied with the international standards, whether that country has complied with the regional standards, and whether that country has complied with the domestic standards, and whether that election is good or not. In between that period, so a number of countries I did under the African Union, but in between that period, the East African community developed a similar model. And then in 2016, I was privileged to be then hired as a coordinator again, in charge of long-term observers, short-term observers, staying in that country for almost 2 or 3 months, and that's normally the model that operates. And I was hired by the East African community to manage the general election of the Republic of Uganda in the 2016 general election in Uganda. That's under the East African Community, and I can see the flag of EAC there. In 2021 election, just after the COVID, the Carter Center, under the leadership of Jimmy Carter, gave me an opportunity to go and manage the elections in Zambia. And the elections in Zambia at that time were done under COVID structures and COVID mechanisms. So I was in Zambia for about 4 months, managing the election in Zambia on behalf of the Carter Center. As I said, I've been privileged to do 8 elections.
Did you say managing or observing?
As a coordinator of election, you are basically managing that election on behalf of the person who has taken you there, but at the same time you are observing. So you are working very, very closely with the EMB and reporting regularly on the challenges, hiccups, and that you are checking there. So you are basically hosted by the EMB of that country. Around that time, I realized that apart from the 1997 election, I hadn't done much in Kenya in terms of active involvement in election observation and election management. So the Standard Media Group came up with an election consultancy, and I was lucky to be on that team again, focusing mostly the 2017 elections, focusing mostly on the technology of election and the voter transmission of the election. That was my focus when I was working at the Standard Media Group. So on a consultancy basis, so I knew exactly where the challenges are. Chair, I have experience at my fingertips when it comes to auditing an entire electoral process. I know what happens on voter registration. Like right now, I know where we're going to have a challenge on voter registration. I know the basics of solving that problem. I remember that our former head of state, who was my head of mission in the Zambia election, now is the president of Ghana. That time he was in the opposition. He told me, make it simple. Election is not complex. Make it simple. If you remember the decision of the Supreme Court on the nullification, if you remember, Justice Mwilo was asking...
I think it's fair enough for your introduction. You will speak to those other things around elections as we go by.
Most obliged.
Yeah, allow me to ask the Vice Chair to also ask you a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, Mr. Kakai, I've heard you mention that you have done a lot of electoral observation within Africa. That's right?
That's right.
Out of your experience, and of course your experience emanating from your entire career, what are the competencies that you have picked, skills and disciplines that are outside the legal profession that you can use to steer the IEBC to the next level as a chairman?
Thank you for that question. As you observe elections, and I said 8 countries have consolidated certain skills and in essence acquiring them as now my call of nature in terms of election. One, you need to understand administration. In the countries and in the places I've visited, I've been able to understand that an EMB can easily mess the election if the administration, the governance structures of that institution, and the management of that institution is lacking. That is a skill that I want to import and try it here if I'm lucky. The other skill that I've been able to know is the governance skills. In most of those institutions, you realize that during election, things become so hot, and you need to have somebody who brings in these soft governance skills to minimize or reduce the chances of conflict. That is something that I want to leverage on. Another skill that I want to bring is that I have a background of human rights. And in elections, I want to see what is the human right component that we can bring in this institution. Why do we see some members of the IEBC losing their lives, dying, and there's no scheme to compensate them? These skills are what I want to bring, innovate them from other countries. I've seen them working. I want to see how this can work. And these are the skills that I want to bring over and above my legal training. Finally, I want to bring a skill of reform. I've been privileged to do reform in terms of following up on every year's election report whenever a country does the election, and ensuring that those recommendations that have come from those reports find their way in the legal reform, in the policy reform, or in the administrative reforms. That is the skill that I think I have and I want to bring. Finally, Chair, those are hard skills, but they're also soft skills. You cannot manage an EMB if you don't have soft skills of how to manage it, if you don't know how to have synergy in an organization, if you don't know how to be a team player, if you don't know how to manage conflict, even the slightest of the conflict, you must have those soft skills, and I possess them. Thank you.
Mr. Kakai, do you think that having mediation and arbitration skills is important for the job that you are now here for?
Yes. As a lawyer, I also participate in mediation. And if I reflect, for example, if I may answer that question with the help of experience, if I remember the last election, if there was any attempt for mediation, it will have solved what we witnessed. So mediation is a critical tool that a chair of IEBC can utilize. And you can call in any mediator to help if you can't mediate, but it's a softer tool of assisting to calm down things.
Thank you, Mr. Kakai. Now, to just conclude, please tell this panel whether in your journey, in your career journey, you have had an instance where you have been tested and your leadership skills have come through at a point where there have been maybe an instance of pressure and conflict and maybe external influence.
On election, I said that I've done 8 countries, and one country, without naming that country, we were doing a report, and the report wasn't looking very good on them in terms of participation of women in elections. It was really bad, and they didn't want that information, that we try and see how we can make the report subtle, because they did one negative report. That's a test on your integrity as a person. It's a test on your integrity as an observer. And since all of them are the one charged with doing the reports, I said we can't do that. We all witnessed that participation of women is limited. There are very few women, yet you have a legal framework that allows you to have women participating, but you are not utilizing the legal framework because of the cultural imbalance in that country. That is one thing that I was tested.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Allow me to ask Karo Kituku to also engage you in some questions. Thank you, Karo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon again, Mr. Kissinger.
Good afternoon.
I would like us to have a conversation around the area for political parties and parties primaries. This is because, as you may know, political parties, if you're successful to become the chairperson of the IEBC, will be your biggest stakeholder. So there is this contention and there is this problem that has always been experienced each electoral cycle on party primaries. That there are challenges that come up with nomination processes, pre-elections, and I would like you to explain to us what you think is the problem and the gap that exists in that area, and how do you intend to address that gap should you become successful?
Thank you for that question. Every political party in this country has a constitution. Every political party. These political parties are registered by the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties. The law has allowed the PPLC, the Political Parties Liaison Committees, to take a very critical role in managing of political parties. Now, the conflict of primaries are basically an election in the electoral cycle. And then IEBC has a very big role in dealing with the political parties. Now, the interplay between IEBC, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, and the Political Liaison Committee take a very central role in terms of managing and coalescing around political parties. Now, the biggest problem with the political parties comes with, one, their respective constitutions. And what do they say in the constitutions when it comes to coming up with the party lists for their candidates who are going to participate in that election? That is normally the biggest problem. The biggest problem being they do not rely and try to ensure that probably the gender rule is observed in those primaries, number one. Number two, the issue of PWDs is not observed in that list, and the issue of women and minorities are not observed on those issues. So that is where normally the problem and the anarchy and the confusion appears whenever political parties are doing their primaries. So to navigate around that issue, and of course the issue of funds in terms of allowing women to participate, to contest an election, and it's a very confusing thing. So to manage that conflict within the political parties there has to be a very strong stakeholder engagement of the political parties themselves to relook at their constitution and their rules in terms of nomination. The other thing to do is to tap on the skills of PPLC, which is by law one of the conveners in terms of bringing together political parties and as well as the IEBC. Number three, IEBC to have very strict rules on when to accept this list or not to accept this list. I know that one of the contention is the female, the male, and the minorities and the PWDs. Although we do not have a proper framework to ensure that political parties comply with the party lists to be gender sensitive, you still have to think of other means and ways of coming up with a representative list.
Thank you for that. So what in your view is specifically the mandate of the IEBC to ensure that the political parties operate within the legal framework during the nomination process?
The IEBC by law is required to liaise, coordinate, and operate together with the Registrar of Political Parties, because the Registrar of Political Parties is the one that's appointing them. But at the same time, the IEBC at the same time is supposed to be, they have very strict guidelines on how those political parties are supposed to behave, how they're supposed to deal with. You look at the Political Parties Act, if they're supposed to comply with those regulations and the rules under the Political Parties Act to ensure that they comply with the law.
Does the IBC have any obligation to supervise the political parties' nominations?
Yes, it has.
Tell us more about that.
It takes me back to the question that I was saying, the interplay between the political parties, the Political Parties Liaison Committee, the IEBC, and the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties. So the IEBC will comes up with rules to ensure that the political parties comply with those rules in terms of nomination, the rules for nomination. And if you fail to comply with those rules of nomination, then there are consequences to that.
Okay, so again, another area related to that is on the campaigning financing. There is no law currently in Kenya that guides the financing of campaigns. So what would you propose to be measures that can be undertaken by IEBC to regulate that area?
Thank you for that question. The campaigns finance, there's a campaigns finance law. It's called the Campaign Finance Act of 2013. What happened is that when that act came in place, the law was silent, or comes up with what we call regulations. So we have the act in place and a detailed law, but we do not have regulations that support that act. This matter has been litigated, for your information, and there are several courts that have opined on this issue. And the courts have said that you do not need Parliament to enact regulations. So the solution, and it will always be a problem in Kenya, we are going into election in the next 2 years, it will be a problem. The solution to this, if you remember what I said, simplicity, is to allow IEBC to do its work, and IEBC to come up with the regulations on finance campaign, which will supplement the Finance Campaign Act of 2013.
Who should allow? Is to allow. Who,
the law.
Who should allow?
Chair, the law allows IEBC to come up with finance regulations. So IEBC has to do its work. It's only through that that you will have an election that is contested fairly, because finances is an important thing in elections. Thank you.
So if you have looked at the 2022 post-election review report, it has identified some of the significant challenges that exist in the conduct of party primaries in regard to transparency and fairness. Now, should you be successful and you become the chairperson of the IEBC, what specific measures would you propose that would be put in place by the IEBC to enhance the integrity and credibility of the nomination process for parties?
I think, thank you for that question. Then the simple answer comes to one, serious stakeholder engagement of those political parties, IEBC, PPLC, ORP. First thing. Number two is to look at the nomination rules that exist and identify various gaps that are there to enhance electoral process. And when you are looking at these nomination rules, you must ask yourself whether those nomination rules speak to the spirit of the Constitution. What is required in the Constitution for nomination, what is expected of the Constitution in terms of nomination, the outlook, and whether those rules speak to the Constitution and the spirit of the law. Those are the tangible things that I will have to deal with.
Maybe your views, we use technology in voting. What would you propose? Like, what do you think should happen? Can we promote the use of technology in party nominations?
Thank you. We have KIMS kit. And this KIMS kit starts all the way from registration, voting, all through to candidates, and then the transmission of results. So it's a comprehensive system. Now, the use of technology is something that we must continue aspiring to do. And we need to come up with a new platform or a new portal or a new system to ensure that even the technology is used during the party primaries. Because even we are looking, and I'm a student who says that even we need to be moving to have technology doing the AI technology. Well, voters, how do you reach out to these voters and you don't have money for voter education because countries never fund for voter education? Can we harness that to use AI? We've seen AI doing very well in India and doing very well in the US. So technology, there will never be a deficiency of using technology in an electoral process. And technology answers that question of how simple is that election.
All right, thank you. And lastly from me, what should you become successful, what would be your vision for the use of ICT and basically modernizing the electoral system in Kenya for the next 10 years, 5 years? You can take us gradually, 5 years, 10 years. What is your vision? What do you think the ICT should look like?
We must start by priding ourselves as Kenyans for having an ICT platform in an electoral process. So where we are okay. What we need to do, and my vision will be, what are these other IT platforms or IT-related ideas that we can add to the election to make it more transparent, to make it easy, and to make it accessible to everybody. For example, why can't we have IT being incorporated in voter education? Why can't IEBC come up with IT in voter education? We focused more on results transmission. And most of the energies for Kenyans were focused on results transmission, and particularly the presidential. But we left a lot of IT space. So we can have that. Technology doesn't just mean the computer. It also means social media, any other facilities that are using technology, Twitter, X, Facebook. How can we use these things to ensure that IEBC is 100% IT friendly? And these are some of the things that will be my vision, to ensure that from the button of your phone, you can ask a question, for example, what is the name of my polling station? That's use of technology. And then it will come and tell you your polling station is this. How do we enhance that? If you want to know about your civic rights or your voter rights, it should be at the palm of your hand. So we can encompass these things and enlarge the IT scale in terms of election management and observation, and in terms of election preparedness throughout the electoral cycle.
So as a last follow-up question, then what would be the use of technology in detecting and preventing electoral malpractices?
Thank you. The electoral malpractices are many, and the law establishes them. And one of the electoral malpractice is misinformation or disinformation, for example, because there's so much that goes out there which is not true information about really what's happening. So depending on the IT expertise that will be there, and depending on the program itself, then it should be able to detect and block that which one thinks is a problem. If there's a misinformation coming in, for example, you can have, before the election, you can have an information like, oh, a certain candidate has died, and therefore there will be no election there. And so that will depress the person who is coming to vote. So can we have a system, and that's entirely within the ICT department of the IEBC, that now tries to sieve and say this is not true, and the only true information reaches out to the voter. So IT is something that is expensive, though, to have IT systems in place, but I think it's a worthwhile cost.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kissinger. I wish you the best, and thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you. Allow me to ask Dr. Koki Muli to also engage you with some questions.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon, Kakai, and it's truly nice to see you. I actually had forgotten that we had offered you a job, but I'm really happy, as we kept on saying then, and we keep on saying here now, it's actually about the country, and any contribution that we make towards the democratization process is contribution towards value addition to the process. So I'm very happy that you actually, I remember the conversation around whether to work for IEBC or not, the election management body. At the time, it used to be better than now. And therefore, we are actually quite happy that you could be as one of the applicants to be here to be interviewed for the position of chair. So karibu sana. I wanted to put you at rest and also to tell you that you have mentioned that you managed 8 elections, e.g. in Uganda, in Zambia. I wanted to know exactly what you did with the EMBs to manage the processes, and also for how long was this assignment?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Koki, for that question. One of the main responsibility of a coordinator of elections, whether you are hired by the African Union, by the East African Community, or the Carter Center, or any other observer group missions, your work is to pitch camp at the EMB. Your work is to carry the electoral cycle with you and tell that EMB, this is the electoral cycle that you are supposed to respect, that you are supposed to adhere to, with the view of having a credible election. You camp there. You then start evaluating as a role each step of that electoral cycle. Did that EMB, election management body, miss anything on voter registration? Did it miss anything on candidate registration? Did it miss anything on campaign finance and campaign issues? Did it miss anything on voter education? If it did, you then identify those issues that were missed, and those issues form your recommendation. As I said, my responsibility was to come up with a mission report, and therefore it forms your recommendation to help that EMB manage future elections in a better and transparent manner. You also, as a responsibility, give them guidance, advice of where you think they ought to improve. You check them. We call it checkmate. You check them. You also warn them that don't go that direction, go this direction, because the law allows you to do that. Finally, it was my responsibility to read the entire constitution of each of those countries you are in at the given time, and to read the entire legal framework in those countries, and then advise them based on the legal framework. So that was basically the responsibility.
Thank you very much, Kakai. You are also, you mentioned to us that you are also bringing in some skills in reforms. We are very concerned of course, about the perennial problems we have, the challenges we experience every election year. There are always problems associated with acceptance of election results or challenge of the same, especially presidential elections since the 2010 constitution. We want to have a rebirth, to have a country where the election management body, i.e. the IEBC, that if you are successful you will chair, must midwife a transformative process that gives us election results that are accepted by all contestants, and that within a peaceful environment where the election is professionally conducted and so on and so forth. So if you are successful in this position, there will be a lot of work that requires to be done to achieve what I've just said. So with those transformative and reforms skills that you are bringing in, identify for the panel the 3 priority challenges that face the electoral democracy environment in Kenya, or that the 3 challenges that the IEBC faces in advancing its work. Just 3 challenges, and then outline for us how you prioritize them and how you will address them to give Kenya that dream destination I've just described. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koki. One of the biggest challenge from where I sit will be you have so many gaps in the law. And those gaps have been taken care of by judicial decisions, but those gaps have not found themselves in legislation. That's a very big challenge for the IEBC in terms of reforms. How do we deal with these gaps? Are they doable within the shortest period of time? Is it something that we will go into the next election with these legal gaps? I'll give an example on the greatest reform challenges we have. We are lucky that we have the Elections Act, which is, I think, over-legislated. But we have a constitutional challenge that we'll have to deal with as we go toward the next election. How do we deal with the issue of boundary review and delimitation? We all know that the timelines has expired. That's a very hot potato in the room. How are we going to deal with this? The issues of protected constituencies. So that's one of the biggest things that we have to look into. As we deal with the reforms, we also have to ask ourselves, how are we dealing with the issue of credibility as a big challenge for IEBC? We year in, year out, we are told that the institution is not credible, for good or for bad reasons, for known or unknown reasons. You are going into another election, you have 2 years to election. As chair, if I'm lucky, how will I enhance and ensure that that issue of credibility is dealt with? Because it all begins with the issue of credibility. What advantages do I do? What do I do to go about it? And how do I bring stakeholders in place to deal with it? Finally, the other challenge I foresee in terms of this is the lack of IEBC Act. The lack of IEBC Act Section 18 allows the formation of the IEBC Fund. We don't have it, and the IEBC Fund will have been good to ensure that those monies that are not coming from the exchequer are acquired from other development partners to enhance the electoral process. So those are some of the issues that I can touch on, and I've tried to say how I can deal with them in terms of reform and in terms of lobbying and negotiating with relevant institutions to ensure that this proper legislation and things take place for the purpose of having a credible election.
Thank you very much, Kakai. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Allow me to ask FCPA Tanui to also ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Bwana Kakai. Now, let me start. I was looking at your documents, and I saw that at some point at the judiciary, you are the accounting officer. What circumstances are under? At what point did you become an accounting officer for the judiciary?
My substantive position at the judiciary was a deputy chief registrar. But at some point or at some time, the then chief registrar exited. And as they were seeking for a replacement, any institution in this country will always have a temporary person as an acting accounting officer. And therefore you are limited. The terms of reference are, you are not a full accounting officer, your terms are just limited for holding the position. So you don't incur anything. You don't approve any payment. You only spend what was approved by the former accounting officer. So it's an interim measure which is normally put in government to ensure that there's no vacuum. So it was for a very short period of time without the authority to incur.
Now, with that experience of being an accounting officer, you will note that other than Teacher Service Commission, the other constitutional commission that has the highest allocation of funding is actually IEBC. So what would be your role as a chairperson of IEBC with regard to management of financial resources of the electoral management body?
Thank you. If I happen to be the chair, I hope I will, of IEBC, my responsibility is not that of an accounting officer, because IEBC, being an independent institution, has a CEO. The work of a CEO is basically the accounting officer. My responsibility as chair will be oversight. You oversight the operations of the CEO or the secretariat. My responsibility will be policy. You form and come up with the policies with the help of the other commissioners, and you do that. The only issue that the chair has in terms of controlling the accounting officer is if you look at the corporate governance of IEBC, which happens to every other institution, is you have a commissioner from for example, IEBC, you have 6 commissioners. You have a commissioner sitting in various committees so you have 6, IEBC I think has 9 committees, HR, IT, and audit and the rest. So you will have a commissioner sitting there. It is that commissioner who will be sitting as a member who will give you briefs in terms of corporate governance and accountability mechanisms that are enshrined on the CEO. So the chair only receives it at plenary, those reports, but you are not involved at all with the day-to-day operation in terms of an accounting officer. The only part you get involved is when probably the accounting officer briefs you and tells you we need to go to Bunge and push for more funds, we need to go to this and lobby for more money, we need to have these development partners who are coming in to give us funds, but you'll have policy briefs in terms of your role. So your role as chair, you restrict yourself to your lane to avoid unnecessary squabbles within the institution.
Now, following it up or down, because you've said as a chair there will be a commissioner responsible for finances and reporting.
Sitting as a committee in that committee.
Sitting in the committee, and I would assume they should be like the finance committee. And I think there are 7 committees at IEBC.
Correct.
So there will be a commissioner. So what will be the role of this commissioner in this specific committee? And I want to follow that with the the last petition of 2022 elections. And there was one of the senior councils who made a statement that it is not the work of commissioners of IEBC, whether in majority or minority, to procure services. So what would be the role of that commissioner in any of the committees that will be set up?
One of the good practices of governance and corporate management, even if you look at Mwongozo, for example, is you cannot leave the CEO, who is the accounting officer, to run the show alone without oversight. Remember, one of the responsibilities of the commission is to oversight. The only way you oversight, in my view, will be sitting in those committees. You need to know, for example, if they are procuring ballot papers. Was the law followed? Was the best bid awarded? Are all the procurement regulations followed? Are all the financial regulations followed? Are we in line with everyone? Have we sought for opinion from the Attorney General or whatever it is? You need to be there. Now, your role there is therefore only oversight and knowing what's going on. Remember, the spokesperson of the IEBC is the chair. So if the chair is not represented at committee level by his commissioners, how will he then be a spokesperson to speak about what? So that commissioner in plenary will give the report to all the commissioners that I sit in HR. These are the challenges in HR committee. How we are solving in this committee is like this. So we are moving forward. I sit in ICT. We don't have proper documents, or we don't have proper systems for the next election. We want to purchase systems. You are feeding to the chair. So if chair is asked by members of the fourth estate, he will say, I am aware what's happening and I'm oversighting. So you can't ignore it. And that's why we need to have synergy in that institution. The role of the chair, the role of the other commissioners vis-a-vis the CEO, you work together.
Now, that is your proposed way, but the reality on the ground, which is actually confirmed by Public Accounts Committee and even the Auditor General in the various audit reports, is that there have been instances where the commissioners and even the secretariat have had conflict, either in procurement process, and we've had cases, I think they cited even the KIMS kit, the procurement of KIMS kit. So as a reform expert, because you've told us one of the skills that you have are reform related. So how would you address that? Because the reality on the ground is that there have been issues of conflict between commissioners on procurement-related matters with the Secretariat. Thank you.
I will take them through Mwongozo as a starting principle. Number two, I don't think it's in the interest of any commissioner to go there and start getting involved in the nitty-gritty details of mismanaging or managing the affairs of the committee. I think, and sometimes it's very difficult to legislate some things. Some things is just common sense, and some things is just, what is this in humanity? You cannot legislate everything. You cannot have policies to everything. one needs to know that my role and responsibility as a commissioner is to know how we are dealing with, for example, ICT system. And the only way you know is to be in that committee and informed. But then when you are there, you need to skip your lane and know that my responsibility ends here. You are there for the good of the country. Because unless you oversight, suppose the CEO missteps, suppose you are not aware that we don't have voting materials in place on time, who will explain that? You need to have, you are in the kitchen, you are not cooking, but you are aware that elections is going on and you want to understand where we are. So the reason why that is there in terms of corporate governance is just synergy, relationship and communication, which is being enhanced from the secretariat, the day-to-day running of the institution, and coming to the policy oversight and legislation. So I think that it's difficult to reform that area. It is just recalling and telling people to do the right thing.
Now, I've heard you mention about Mwongozo severally, Code of Governance. Is Mwongozo applicable to constitutional commissions and more so IEBC? And secondly, in light of the ruling, there was Engineer Kamau, if you followed the case of Engineer Kamau, the CS, Jared Ngilu, with the EACC, where during that time there were no commissioners at EACC, and they were prosecuted, and they went to court, and they said there were no commissioners at EACC. And in that ruling, it is actually said that the commission is the commissioners. It is not the secretary. So that there can never be a commission without commissioners. So looking at Mwongozo as a code of governance, to what extent then is it applicable to constitutional commissions? Thank you.
Well, when you look at the history of Mwongozo, and if my history serves me well, Mwongozo came in as a code of principles, and it was one of the key recommendations in the Kriegler report. We all remember that Kriegler came in this country for specific duties and reasons. So in my view and my understanding, Mwongozo has very nice tenets and principles there, and those principles come or flow in with the spirit of the Constitution. So it will still be applicable to any independent commission and has gained prominence in the public sector. So there's nothing wrong, and the IEBC cannot be limited to the tenets that are enshrined in Mwongozo, because it's all about transparency, accountability, fairness, and just how you manage the board meetings, who signs the minutes. If you have an objection, why should you write an objection? There's a book that you sign into, and so forth. So these are principles that we can't wish away and are applicable to the public sector.
Lastly, you did mention about the Campaign Financing Act, and you did mention that the regulations are yet to be, is it enacted or approved by the National Assembly? What did you?
The regulations,
yes,
are supposed to be enacted, drafted, enacted by the IEBC. National Assembly has got no role in the regulations.
So I believe you must have done your background study before you came for this interview. So what is the status of those regulations? Have IEBC drafted them? Have they ever been presented before the National Assembly since 2013 when the Act was enacted?
I wouldn't know, because that issue was live in court. So this is guesswork. There's a possibility that IEBC was waiting for directions from the court, because this issue has been litigated in court. By the time the court was making an opinion that National Assembly is not involved in regulations, I'm not so sure whether IEBC has now enacted them. But I'll also assume that probably they're in draft form, ready, but they are waiting the commissioners to come in and then officialize them. I tried to look at, in my research, I tried to look at the website, and I noticed that they didn't even have the current strategic plan. So probably it's one of the issues in the current strategic plan if the new commissioners come in. So my guesswork will be, I'm not sure the status. I don't know whether they are ready or not ready, but all I know is that the new commissioners will have to deal with the campaign finance regulation in the shortest time possible before the next election. Thank you.
Lastly, related to regulations, I think under the Statutory Instruments Act, the National Assembly normally says that all regulations have to be presented before them for approval before implementation. Yeah. Does that apply for constitutional commissions, and in this case IEBC, that requirement?
Again, when you look at that ruling, and this is where many courts come up with different rulings on this issue, and sometimes Kenyans get a little bit confused. But unless that ruling has been appealed, I'll stick to that ruling. And the ruling was to the effect that IEBC has full mandate to prepare regulations without involvement of the National Assembly. So I will stick there. I'm not so sure whether the lawyers appeal or whether there's an appeal on board or not. But at the same time, I know how important it is, because the National Assembly are politicians and they are stakeholders. So I know how important it is to have stakeholders engagement through those regulations, because there has to be something called public participation. So my assumption then will be that when they came up, or when they will be coming up with the regulations, there will be some public participation, and that public participation will then involve politicians, and politicians will have a say, because you can't rule away the involvement of politicians. So as much as our law is very descriptive, as much as our judges stick to the law, because that's what they are trained to stick to the law, there is what happens in the machinery on the ground is different. So I think that engagement is critical, and that's why we have the Political Parties Liaison Committee, body under the law, which can navigate around these issues.
Thank you, and wish you all the best. Thank you, Chair.
Allow me to ask James Misati to take up and ask some questions.
Thanks so much, Chair. I also take the cue to also ask you a few questions related to the governance of IEBC, if you are given the opportunity to be the chair. During the elections, the scale and magnitude of the general election, hiring of temporary staff is usually inevitable. From where you sit, or from your experience, what do you think will be the risks of hiring temporary staff during that short period? And how do you propose to mitigate any of the risks, if any?
I didn't understand the question.
I'm asking you that during the general elections, like 2027, it's always almost inevitable that you have to hire temporary staff, the clerks and other people. So what do you think are the risks that are associated with such hiring, and what do you propose as mitigation of such risks?
I understand you now. In election and approaching election time, the work becomes too busy at any EMB. But because EMBs are limited, they rely on poll officials hired from outside, clerks, and so forth and so on. Now you have 290 constituencies, and therefore you have to hire people to fill in the 290, to man those 290 constituencies. Now, the risk with that is cost. The cost implication. The cost implication of hiring, every polling station I think has 6, if my memory serves me well, 6 polling clerks, and you have a presiding officer. So if you take that, you multiply by the number of constituencies, and you multiply by the number of days that the election is being done. Normally it's done 3 days. It's a very expensive process. So the main risk of that is that it makes the election become very expensive. To mitigate, it will need serious stakeholder engagement to know whether we should continue hiring polling staff for the shortest period of time and spend so much money, or do we approach like other countries where I've been? I've seen public servants being recruited. Of course, they don't earn a salary to do the election work. That happens in so many countries, but then there's also a risk to that. But the main risk is cost involvement.
Sorry, I may guide you a bit. The major risks we can talk about, because when you talk about cost, if you are practically going to be the chairman of IEBC, you should be aware that the number of polling stations are already known. So there is no way you can say that the cost will be a risk. The risk we may be talking about issues of security risks, the issues of logistics, and maybe getting people to the system to handle documents who are not well trained. Because I should not think that the issue of cost should arise, because I should expect that if you are chair of IEBC, you should be able to plan early enough, because that's where the cost is factored in from Treasury. So issues of logistics, issues of lack of adequate training, those are some of the risks we can think of. That's for your guide.
Thank you.
Because getting in new people, you may not know them. They have been proposed by politicians and other things. Now, the other thing I want to ask you in relation to the governance of IEBC, if you get an opportunity and you are the chair of IEBC, several reports have been talking about the conflicts between the Secretariat and the commissioners. What do you think you'll be able to propose to finish those perceived conflicts once and for all?
Thank you, Mr. Misati, for that question. The chair of IEBC has specific mandate and responsibility, and is the head of that institution. The conflict that has existed, I think, in the last 10 years between the Secretariat and the Commission is something that, when you look at the governance structure of IEBC, is something that is well documented in terms of what the two heads are supposed to be doing. But I think what I will do personally will be the issue of creating very strong synergy with my commissioners, the issue of having soft skills in mediation that we spoke about, the issue of encouraging people to focus on what brought us here as opposed to unnecessary conflict. So you mitigate these conflicts in the boardroom, you synergize, you talk to them, you are their head, you are their boss, you talk to them, you encourage them. Because some things you can't legislate beyond what human being can do. So I will more of apply soft skills to ensure that conflicts do not arise. But also have regular meetings with the CEO because the CEO is basically the secretary of the board. So have regular meetings with CEO and bring those conflicts in the boardroom and find out where is the problem and how can we solve it. Because remember, the current IEBC is going to be there for only 2 years and the elections are online. Did Kenyans take you there to go and start fighting in the boardroom? Kenyans took you there to deliver a credible election. Can you focus on the mandate you're supposed to do? So more of synergy creation.
Thanks so much. The last question from me. From the recommendation of the Kissinger report, they recommended that the professional body of IEBC, like the secretariat, to be very independent. Do you think it's practically possible? Because the Kissinger report to professionalize election management by making the secretariat fully independent in its operation duties. Do you think such a recommendation is practically possible in our current situation?
I remember, and Dr. Koki, you can remember this, we used to have a discussion sometimes back when we were disbanding ECK. And the reason why we disbanded ECK is practically what you are saying. And we said that even the name must change from Electoral Commission of Kenya to independent. And we came to double IEBC and we were fighting with that issue of independent. Now we have IEBC, we're still fighting with the aspect of the I, the independence. So for me, from the old school thinking, as long as you have the law, and the law prescribes you to be independent, then you are independent. It's the responsibility, therefore, of the chairman.
Sorry, you didn't get my question. I'm saying the Kissinger report recommended to the secretariat of IEBC to be independent on its own. Is it practically possible from where you sit?
I was actually coming there, but I was taking a longer route. So, you can't, I think it's very difficult. In my view, it's very, very difficult to have the secretariat independent from who? Are we saying there are some recommendations are normally given in reports, but these recommendations sometimes are superfluous. You can't say that a secretariat to be independent from who? Why do you want to be independent in the first place as a secretariat? I think it's the organization, the whole organization, the secretariat and the commission that should be independent.
Thanks so much. I agree with you because it's actually the commissioners who are responsible, who take charge, and who are answerable to the Kenyans. Thanks so much, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Evans. We now move to Fatuma Saman to ask her questions, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kissinger. Is it okay to call you that?
I was named after Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State. Okay. So I pride myself to be called Kissinger.
Okay, good to know. If you look at the recent years, public trust in IEBC has been dwindling. And so if you get an opportunity to become the chair, what are these things you'll do, or rather initiatives that you'll put in place to ensure that the institution wins back public confidence?
Thank you. Trust will always be a challenge to any EMB. We have a trust deficit, a trust issue with the IEBC. Some of the practical things we can do is increased stakeholder engagement. You need to bring together all the stakeholders in the electoral processes and discuss and come up with practical solutions on how do we deal with this issue of trust. Because once you don't have trust, then it will challenge you with the issue of credibility of the election. Number two, you need to have a very strong communication team or communication strategy. What is it that you are doing? You need to be as transparent as possible. You need to open your doors and your windows to everybody, every voter, every Kenyan to understand what you are doing. You need to communicate. You need to be felt. You need to be everywhere. That's the only way you increase the issue of trust. The electoral processes, again, from beginning of voter registration, you need to be very transparent. If members of the public are saying the voter register is not proper, is not updated, explain to them. Increase their trust. Explain to them why the voter register is not updated. Tell them and give them very practical solutions what you are going to do as an IEBC to have a proper voter register, because a critical document when you are going to the election. Voter education, you need to explain to them. So that trust issue entirely means you need to enhance it through those mechanisms that I've talked about. But more important is communication. You need to be trusted before that voter goes to an electoral process.
Just as a follow-up, how do you balance between independence and stakeholder engagement? Because there are, of course, stakeholders that if you do not engage wisely, the institution may lose its independence. So how do you balance between that?
And unfortunately, when you are working in the realm of elections, you must have a stakeholder engagement, because it's the stakeholder engagement that gives you the trust issue that we are talking about previously. So you must have stakeholder engagement. And luckily for us, we have even legislated the stakeholder engagement. That's why PPLC exists, to bring these parties together. And also, situations arise when all voters want to engage with you. But when you are engaging with the stakeholders, you are limiting yourself only to the process of election. You are limiting yourself only to the transparency of the election. You are limiting to yourself of only the gaps that exist in the process that you want to fix with the help of those stakeholders. For example, if you are going into an election and you don't involve critical stakeholders like women organizations or PWDs or minorities, you'll have a problem. But now, how you limit that engagement to independence is that you allow the engagement to take place, but you go back and say, I am independent and I'll only stick to what the law says that I must do, and therefore you will give me, as a stakeholder, you will give me input, but that input, if it will compromise the independence, then I will not do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Nicodemus Bore, do you want to engage the candidate?
Thank you, Chair. Kissinger, when you are describing your CV and yourself, you said you are a reformer. And would wish to tell this honorable panelists an area in which you have really taken up on reforms. And in case you get the opportunity to serve as a chair of IEBC, what kind of reforms will you bring forth to the Commission?
Thank you very much. Yes, I am a reformer. And I must have mentioned that I also worked in human rights for a very long period of time. And human rights and reform are brothers, cousins. In the judiciary, one of the biggest reform program that I was engaged in is the Judicial Transformation Project. And I had mentioned to it previously, which was a US-funded, World Bank-funded project that transformed that judiciary to where it is. I pride myself for that, and nobody can take that away from me. When it comes to other reforms, I said that I was in the GIZ, the German Technical Corporation, my work was basically reform. Reform based in the sense that you follow up laws which have not been enacted and you ensure you enact. And we were supporting the Ministry of Justice at the time with a lot of reforms during the GJ laws and supporting the ethics and anti-corruption with combating corruption on laws on corruption. That is reform based. When it comes to if I happen to go to IEBC, what reforms will I do? One, have a desk, recruit a person, or if there's there's a legal department there, have a desk in the legal department. Have someone follow up on legislation, policies, and reforms that are pending, that have been enacted in Parliament or that are pending somewhere and so forth, and have them in place. For example, that we spoke about the issues of boundary. We don't have a law on boundary delimitation. But the law is somewhere in the Senate still being worked on. So can we talk to the senator who has proposed that law for boundary delimitation, Senator Kajwang? Can we tell him to speed it up, and what requirements does he require? Because we are critical stakeholders in this electoral process. Number two, the law says we should have an IEBC fund, a fund which can change the dynamics of elections in this country, because it will allow basically voters to be properly educated, because you can seek funds from other stakeholders. Can we have this in place as a reform mechanism? So these are some of the basic things in terms of reform that can assist the IEBC. Policies and regulations. We spoke about regulations which are not in place, they are lying there or they are supposed to be done. That is the critical work in terms of doing these elections. So some of those reforms are the ones that I will pioneer and I'll push for with the help of the Secretariat and other commissioners.
I thank you for answering that. You said you worked very closely with EACC on reforms and doing laws that help in anti-corruption. In the year 2020, it's in the public domain that EACC recommended the prosecution of former Chief Justice. Was it Chief Justice or Chief Registrar? And among the people who EACC recommended for prosecution was also your name. Maybe you give us a little background on what had transpired, and in the same time, this position you are seeking requires confidence in the public. So with that, a little bit of interruption by EACC on your reform agenda, can you please give a little background on what transpired and whether you are cleared or not?
Thank you very much for that question. When I was at that institution, and as I said before, we pioneered a program called the Judicial Performance Project Program. And there was a lot going on. And we moved in at a time when the new constitution had actually come into place. And therefore we are pioneering reforms in the judiciary. Some of the things we were dealing with were issues of computerization of the entire judiciary. The other things we were doing or dealing with in that project was the issue of construction of courts across the country. And we had a target, said we want to have about 47 courts in each county. For now, they have them in each county. That was the project. In the process, and this project had a lot of financial scrutiny. In the process of implementing that project, there was a lot of miscommunication. There was a lot of discommunication, disinformation. People didn't understand what was going on. So when there were issues or investigations touching on one of the courts that had not been constructed, the investigating agencies heard about it and moved into the institution. Fortunately, there was pure miscommunication because that particular court had been constructed in a different site. So when that happened, of course, challenges like that arise, and we learn lessons from that. The correct information was given to them, and eventually that claim was dropped. And I have given the ruling and supplied the ruling, which clearly says that. So that is what happened. So in terms of loss of money, there was no loss of money, and it's in the public domain. In terms of whether that court was constructed, yes, it was constructed, and they know where it is. So that is what happens. But I must say, in public service, you serve, and while you are serving, you don't understand what will hit you. The only thing that can save you in public service is doing the right thing. Sticking with the law, staying with the law. Rumor can come up in public service to completely finish your career. But in the eventuality, in the long run, you know, rumor twists and turns, but truth stays straight and narrow. In the eventuality, I was vindicated because the court is there.
So it wasn't about a palatial home for the Chief Justice. It was about a court.
There was that issue of the court that I've explained. There was also the issue that arose about the house. And eventually, the only claim at the time about that, and it's good that I talk about it, the only claim at that time that that house had been purchased without a cabinet memo. You know, for purchase of a house at the time, you needed a cabinet memo from the president. We had just come into that institution with the exit of President Mwai Kibaki. This was the new administration. Government documents, when there's change of government, takes forever to get them. When that memo eventually was established and found where it was, it spoke the truth. What the management was doing was only implementing what the cabinet memo by the former president had said. But because there was change of government, there was no memo to be traced. We had a challenge with that. But eventually, that was also withdrawn.
Thank you, Chair.
So, Bwana Kakai, were you dismissed from the judiciary or you left at will?
When you are serving public service and such kind of allegations come in, definitely you will be told to go. Thank you. Until you are cleared.
So as an advocate, after clearance, did you seek redress?
At that time I decided to forgive. Because some of those things were done by people I didn't understand. But because I'm a Christian, I forgave. And I moved on and started doing other things, including these election issues. So I forgave them.
So in the records in Kenya, is that you have been dismissed for gross misconduct, for violating public procurement law in Kenya?
No, that will not be the law. That will not be the thinking, that will not be the understanding. I was not dismissed on those grounds.
What were the grounds?
You know, when that happened, they said that everybody must go and processes must take place and procurement and the EACC must come in and do the investigations and so forth and so on. So then, ideally, everybody was then let to go. And that's what happened, and I left the institution on those issues.
Tanwi?
Just a follow-up. As I was checking your documents, there are some rulings that you've put in your documents, and those rulings were, I think there are two rulings, one at the Magistrates Court and another one at the High Court. And actually, it was about withdrawal of the case by DPP. But I've not heard you mention anything about it, or that's a different case from what my colleague had just asked.
Oh, thank you.
It's not clear what you are explaining and the documentation that you've submitted.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think what I've submitted are two rulings. And those two rulings were the ones that withdrew those criminal cases that were there. The ones that I spoke about, the CJ House and also the Mavoko Court. Those are the rulings that I've submitted. And that's the ruling that came from the High Court when the cases were withdrawn. And they're on record.
Okay, Caro, do you want to engage a bit?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. So, Mr. Kakai, the cases were withdrawn under Section 210? Or on what basis did the DPP withdraw the cases?
At the time when the cases were withdrawn, there was a lot of investigations that had taken place. And then the DPP moved the court saying that he wants those cases withdrawn. And that's under what the circumstance under which the DPP withdrew those cases. And when you look at that ruling, it explains under what circumstances the DPP withdrew that case. So it was withdrawn.
Chair, let me follow again. Now, you will note in those rulings that it is not about, they were withdrawn on the basis of that judgment of Engineer Kamau, the EACC investigating. So it's not about the culpability. It is the fact that EACC, when they were investigating, they were not properly constituted as a commission. So, and I hear you are saying you are acquitted, you didn't want to follow it up. So, kindly clear or clarify for us.
Thank you. It happened 10 years ago. It's an issue that happened 10 years ago in 2015. And when we went to court, of course, we defended ourselves. And eventually, after about almost all witnesses had actually testified. And at that time, in his wisdom, and looking at Engineer Kamau's case, because that was an active case at the time, in his opinion, then the DPP felt that he would withdraw those allegations. For the last 10 years, since the withdrawal of those cases, I've not had any complaint, I've not had anything from them, there's no active case, in short, that is existing in court.
Okay, thank you. Professor Adams Olo.
Thank you, Chair. Kakai Kissinger, I've had occasion to work with you in some projects. You can see how members have come up to inquire on these cases against you. And they're doing so because a person who wants to be an IEBC chairperson, or if that person becomes the IEBC chairperson, they usually face intense scrutiny. And you can see the questions are coming because all these responses you have given, or all the questions that would have been asked, would not have been asked if during your introduction, when you talked about your tenure in the judiciary, if you had come up openly and said that I left the judiciary in this manner, because the only thing you talked about and repeated was the reforms you brought, all that. But when it comes to where there was some cloud, you remained silent. Yet IEBC is an institution that has low trust, as you told us. And therefore, with all these questions that have come, and with all the clarifications that you have had to make, as you sit there as Kakai Kissinger, if the panelists are having questions, you can rest assured Kenyans are also having questions. Look at them and tell them why, despite all those clouds on integrity, they still should trust you to be the IEBC chairman.
Thank you very much. My integrity is unquestionable. My integrity is unquestionable. I have worked in public service, and I worked in that judiciary. I left that judiciary with my understanding that I was a victim, with my understanding that you can be in a place of work and something hits you without knowing where that thing came from. Not all public officers, ladies and gentlemen, not all public officers who are dragged and taken to court are guilty of what they're accused of. Remember, I was a deputy. Remember, I was doing my functions to the best of my ability. If I knew by any insights or any reason that I have a questionable integrity question, then I wouldn't have applied. I applied knowing very well, with clarity of mind, that I'll walk the path of truth. That I'll come here, I knew I was coming, I applied. I'll come here and tell the panel what transpired. I liked what Chairman said when we began this conversation, and he said, this is a conversation. And indeed it has turned out to be a conversation, and it's part of the conversation. Kenyans should never, never, never accuse or hear something has happened to somebody and think that that person is associated with that thing. It's called the pitfalls of public service. So my integrity is unquestionable, and even before the eyes of God.
Thank you. In your previous leadership roles, and there are many, can you tell the panel the 3 challenges that you overcame and that will be relevant to your role as chairperson of the IEBC, and how you navigated and solved those challenges? Don't have to be 3. If it is only 1, also you can just tell us 1.
One of the biggest challenges that I've ever faced in my career and how I navigated around them was the issue of reforms that I was working on in the governance sector. It was very difficult during the GGL loss to push through any idea of reforms without going through a lot of bottlenecks. So that reform issue was a big challenge. How did I, and yet you want to reform because you want something to help you achieve what you want to achieve for the good of the country. So in GGL laws under the then Minister of Justice, what we did was to enlarge stakeholder consultation on those issues of reform, enlarge the capital, and explain to them the importance of these very salient reforms. So it's through enlargement of stakeholder engagement and communication that we were able to navigate that issue of reforms. That is the main obstacle that I engaged and how I managed it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you have some quick questions you want to ask, or do you want to allow me to follow up on something he has said?
Maybe you follow up?
Yes, yeah, let me follow up, then you
then I come from the...
I have a reference here from one called Gladys J. Boss, who claims that she knew you as she was a Deputy Chief Executive Officer at IEBC, and that time you're working for GIZ, and that between 2011 and 2014, you worked under her as a Deputy Chief Registrar of the Judiciary. It says that while I was the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary at that time, during your tenure, she says, as the Deputy Registrar of Judiciary, Mr. Kakai Kissinger was allocated with overall duties and responsibilities, including day-to-day management of the judiciary, with the responsibility of overseeing this number of staff, employees, and external fundraising of projects. And she confirms that you managed what you have said, the Judicial Performance and Improvement Program, and recommends you highly, but seems to commend you in the things you have said, indeed, but seems to indicate, even though you have said you were a deputy, and that this matter that we have talked about, you seem to have had good responsibility and oversight over. And so I think for me, as sitting where I am, it will have been prudent for you to seek a judicial remedy, so that this is not a matter that is going to follow you if you seek a position in public service, because the matter remains documented, and it's not a good record for you. And for the position that you are seeking, we are required to be able to do due diligence over such matters. And you being an advocate of the High Court, then you should be able to seek remedy. But Carol has her hand up. I want to hear what she wants to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kakai, allow me to just follow up on a small issue from the court decision. I've had the chance to look at it, and yes, it's true that the court did allow the DPP to withdraw the case against you and your co-accused in that matter. Now, two things come to my mind. Number one, we have had a candidate who came here yesterday and told us that as a panel, as the selection panel that is recommending persons for appointment as chairperson and members of the IEBC, we should be looking for a candidate that, in his words, is like a Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. It's a very high standard of ethics and integrity, if you look at it in that way. Now, it is a fact that, indeed, at one point in your life, the EACC recommended to the DPP for your prosecution. It is also a fact that the DPP agreed with the findings and recommendations of the EACC and actually charged you in court. Sadly, that process did not come to an end because of perhaps a technical issue with the composition of the EACC. So as I sit here now, I am not able to say whether or not these alleged serious allegations about public finance, public procurement, and abuse of office, allegations against you were established and or not. So your name is still being dragged into the mind. So my concern is, since 2017, when the withdrawal happened, I hear you when you say that the EACC, the DPP, has not taken any other action. There has been public outcry out there on the DPP's processes for withdrawal. So I just need to get your comment and clarification on whether or not there could have been political interferences. And I'm saying this very respectful and with very minded of who your co-accused persons were in that matter and the spaces they occupy today. Could there have been any political interferences why, subsequent to the constitution of the EACC, no other charges or any steps were taken? And what do you say about the fact that these allegations continue to follow you 10 years later, as you say?
I don't, thank you very much for that question. I do not think, I'm not a politician, I can't speak on behalf of a politician, but I do not think that there was any political interference. As I explained earlier, the issues that arose at that time was pure miscommunication and not understanding what happened, and the EACC moved in. So I wouldn't think that there's any issue that political interference has happened, because this, as I said again, happened 10 years ago. In terms of the approach and in terms of my understanding to the process that took place, and I said and I repeat, we had gone through all the witnesses, and at the time when now EACC DPP was withdrawing, most of the witnesses had taken stand, and they knew clearly where the case was going to go, and they could see, because now the evidence was sufficient enough. I said here and I repeat again, I am a person of high integrity, and I might have happened to be in a place at the wrong time, but that doesn't question my integrity at all. It is the only thing that, you can be in a right place but at the wrong time, some bad luck, but I have got no question or no doubt about my integrity.
Thank you, Mr. Kissinger, for that assurance, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Tanwi, if you don't have something to follow up, I will let Adams go.
Yeah.
I think he does have something to do.
He has not answered your question, Chair. You ask him, if it were you, you would look for remedy. Yeah. And we didn't hear, what is your comment? I mean, you decide to leave it that way and forgive?
I said, and I'll repeat, the turmoil I went through at that time, I will repeat, I'm a Christian, the turmoil I went through at that time, what those cases took me through, I turned to God and I forgave them.
Okay, Professor Adams.
Thank you, Kakai Kissinger. From the presentations you have made, it's very clear that you're somebody who really understands the global electoral experiences. I think more than 8 and counting, where you have done either observation or been an expert. Globally, list the 3 conventional electoral systems that countries apply and tell us which one of those that are applied conventionally globally does Kenya use.
I'll mention 2. We have the civil and political rights as a convention.
No. I'm talking of electoral systems.
Okay. On the electoral system, we have the first past the post, winner take it all. That is what we are using in Kenya. We have the mixed proportional representation. That is another legal system that can be used.
Okay. Sorry for that. In Kenya, for one to be declared the president, what is the threshold for you to be declared president-elect?
One, you definitely contested. Number two, you got 50% plus one of the votes that were cast. Then you also got 25% in terms of about 25% or something in several counties, in 25 counties.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kissinger. It's been a great pleasure listening to you, learning, indeed, in the true sense, from your experience and from the great work that you have done globally and on the continent. You have certainly had a mark on these electoral processes in this continent, and we want to thank you for that, and thank you for expressing your interest in this position. We have finished our questions to you, but I don't know whether you have any question that you would like to ask us or any comment.
Thank you. I will only have a comment. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present myself and to showcase my passion for elections and what I'll be able to contribute. I don't take this for granted. I thank you all for that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a bottle of water before you. Feel free to carry it and use it. And remember to pick your documents. They are with us somewhere. One of us should be able to give them to you. Okay, they are somewhere there. Thank you and God bless you. Wishing you well. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is KTN News Desk, and of course, this session that was ongoing is the IEBC Reconstitution Selection Panel interviewing candidates on day 2 today. We already had the day 1 yesterday taking place, and as the session entered day 2 today, we've seen Erastus Ethicon being interviewed and facing the selection panel, and of course being asked the